I think whenever I outsource work to other language providers, if I get no questions, I am worried.
Hello and welcome to the Multilingual Content Podcast, where experts discuss international content management, translation, and global communication. I'm Caterina from Anderto, and today I'm thrilled to welcome Aglaia Pavlerou to the show. In her conversation with our founder Nicola, Aglaia shares insightful stories about how prioritizing localization from the start enabled her team to enhance campaign ideas to create tailored experience for international audiences. We explore the importance of cross-team collaboration to understand roles and limitations upfront before diving into localization. Aglaia brings a wealth of knowledge from her extensive experience in language service providers, her work on the client side, and her current role on the product team at DICE. Please join me in welcoming Aglaia.
Hello, Aglaia, and welcome to the Multilingual Content Podcast.
Hi, Nicola. Very nice to see you. Very happy to be here.
Today, we're going to talk about product localization. But before we jump in straight into the topic, would you mind telling a little bit about yourself, your role at DICE?
Sure. So I have been working in LSPs and then client side for a few different industries. I started off working as a resourcer, vendor management, project manager. I then spent a few years in the travel industry, then advertising, and then I am now working at DICE. I am part of our product team. It's a new experience for me, having only been, a third-party supplier for product teams to now being within the product team and seeing the work as it happens every day. I'm mainly helping the product team with their localization needs, but also the rest of the company, especially as everything else that we do refers to our product and supports our product as well.
Yeah, every localization touches a little bit of everything, yeah. And can you actually share some examples where localization positively impacted a specific international market? For example, a case where a suggestion from the localization team, either you or the translators, improved the user experience in that market?
I think a lot of the times when you work with different stakeholders, especially stakeholders that might not have experience with creating assets or campaigns outside of the English-speaking countries, I think their expectations for localization are quite low. They do not dream big, basically. And I think this is where my team comes in. So sometimes their expectations are very, very low. And I always see so much room for potential and so many other things that we can do to make sure that the user experience is the same in every market. So ideally, where we would like to be at some point is that whoever is using our product or comes across any of our marketing materials feels like this was written for them and it's a product designed for them in their own language. You don't want this to feel as a product that we just pluck from one market and we dropped it in the other. And yes, okay, we updated the copy, but does it really work for them? So I think many times we just get a very simple request and then we elevate it to the right process and quality expectations. So a couple of examples. Usually there's a lot of activity across the company when we are managing all our comms, but also a lot of product requests and development for some of our biggest partners. Some festivals across Europe. For one of our partners who is active in Spain, we decided to do a street campaign that would also coincide with the time of the festival. We just wanted to make sure that everybody was aware of DICE, not just as a ticket partner of the festival, but a company that can give them their best nights out where they can go and discover the best music. And it's a very, very typical scenario. Wherever you are, the creative teams will spend weeks, maybe months, testing different concepts, taglines, visuals, and then they will come to you and they will say, oh, we just need this in this language. You have 2 days. And so in that case, what we decided to do, so first of all, I thought, obviously, this cannot be just a translation job. I met up with the creative team. I explained to them that to their best interest as well to do a more detailed transcription process in this case. and bring in a lot of different stakeholders who can help us pick the best copy for that market. First of all, we basically took the same brief. And I think this is very interesting when you ask the creative team, so this is what you decided on. How did you get here? And also very, very useful for localization. What are the alternative options you considered before you locked this one? So I got a very detailed brief. I briefed my team, but also we got the visuals. And then one of the main things that we knew that was very important to figure out from the beginning was the line breaks. So we had this very beautiful kind of like A4 style posters where it was just maybe 4 or 5 words on the side and then the great visual. So that was a huge restriction. So it wasn't just transcreation, there was also this character restriction. And of course, yeah, we could go longer, we could have longer words, but the end result would not be the same. So we took that into consideration when opting for different options. That was a bit of a overkill, opting for different options. And obviously we provided back translations because we didn't just want the local team to be happy with the copy. We also wanted the buy-in from the creative team and have everybody give their feedback. So that was a really, really great process. Our translators did a great job. They went from the very safe to the very out there options. And this is also great because I think sometimes when you receive a brief, you don't know how far you can go. And by doing this exercise, it was easier for us to see what was the expectation. Sometimes it's very difficult to describe what you want, but when you see something you don't want, you start, defining it a little bit better in your head. We did this very quickly because we had already done some sort of exercises in the team without any requests coming in to kind of flex our transcreation muscles, to come up with a great template, to have a default brief in place about our marketing team's expectations. So it took us a little bit longer, not just 2 days, maybe 3 or 4, but we had an amazing example, an amazing result at the end. And they had a really great impact. Everybody was really excited to see the posters out in the wild. So that was one good example. I'm always looking out for the best experience. Let's say doing a little refresh on our website, and people always think, oh, it's just a copy that we just need to pick up, but also it's all the other elements that contribute to that. So if we're featuring any artists or we're featuring any events, this should also be localized. If we have any, let's say, quotes from fans, why translate the quote that an English-speaking fan has provided? Why don't we just look up quotes that we have for Spanish fans and have something original in Spanish? So for me, obviously, this is additional work. This is asking several people to find the right thing that you need. But if time allows it, then I'm thinking of this through and through localization is what gives the best experience to our users. So whenever a request comes in, I obviously take the stakeholders' request into consideration, but then I also approach this from my point of view and the team's point of view.
Yeah, and it makes sense. I think it ties back with what you were saying, like tailoring, making sure like that it doesn't sound like a translated experience, but it's actually like a local experience. And in a way, it's like it's good, like you're treating the international markets with, let's say, the same level of importance or that you have with the, let's say, home market. And yeah, I mean, absolutely. It sounds really nice. And I do get it that there's like different levels of time, as you said, time and resources sometimes that you don't have. Let's say, for example, you mentioned that you needed to involve stakeholders to approve or help you like choose the copy. So that's obviously extra effort, but it helps make a better experience for the end users. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think by involving them in the process, they can actually see what happens behind the lines. Sometimes I think when you just present someone with a final copy, I've seen this so many times, they just think, oh, but why did you not say that? But you can say this, you can say this, you can say that. And then you have to defend your word. You have to say, well, I considered this option, this and this and this, but because of the visual, this style guideline, or this character restriction, we cannot fit it. I think taking them through the process sometimes to see that the majority of what we do comes from research and informed decisions, they start trusting you more. They know that you don't just sit there, scratch your head and just write a little bit of copy, which sometimes I think we all have these blind spots. We assume what other people do. So I think this really helps with showcasing the work that we do, but also in order to be able to work on this one single project, you spend so much time working, training on what our product is, what our tone of voice is. So there's all these hours of training and onboarding that have gone into this. Yeah, I think it really strengthens the collaboration. And also gives them the satisfaction that even though I don't understand this language, even though I'm not involved in this localization process, I have the confidence that this aligns with the global message and the brand guidelines.
Yeah, and the local impact is definitely much better. Yeah, absolutely. And linking to this, what you mentioned, like working with the creative team, for example, working with the product and developers teams, how do you work with them to include localization consideration as early as possible in the product development cycle?
And I think we mentioned this already in our discussion. A lot of localization managers, they get this question, where should localization be sitting within a startup, a tech company? And I think the product team is the best place to be. For the past few months, I've been working a little bit closer with the designers, the researchers, and the UX writers. And I think this is the best place for a localization manager to influence the design and the copy before it actually reaches localization. So essentially, when the design and the copy is reviewed, you see this from multiple lenses. You see this as potentially a product user, an everyday user of these products through the localization manager's view, through a translator's point of view. You can provide really great feedback and insights and flag any areas where you think that these might be troublesome in localization, to give that heads up for people to consider other options if possible. But I think another thing that very often comes up in these meetings when we are reviewing design and copy is the sort of the taxonomy and the terminology management. Just yesterday, we had a meeting about introducing some new terms to manage variations in product offering. And it was so difficult to define them that the designers had to go through what is the definition in the glossary to figure out if this is the right way to do it or not. So the moment they started describing what are these two terms, apart from myself thinking, okay, so how are we going to localize these? Do we have any obvious options in the other languages? Is it important to be very close to the English, or it just has to be distinguishable terms in the other languages? I was also thinking this is going to be very complicated because essentially it's sort of different words for saying categories and types. You're using words to define different options, and we already have a few of these in our product already. So we had this very interesting discussion with the writers as well, that we kind of have to look at what else we're using and where to make sure that whatever we do here, it's distinguishable. It doesn't have to be the best option as a standalone term, but it has to be something where people see and they say, oh, categories and types and this. They understand what we're talking about, these two different areas of the product. So the perspective that a localization manager brings into those sessions, I think, is multifaceted. And yeah, usually we, as a team, we get to not influence, but definitely provide feedback that is taken into consideration.
Yeah, I mean, your localization is in a unique position to see the same issue across different markets. So it gives you a slightly different way to say some things. So it could be absolutely helpful to give that input. And while in product localization, do you have any specific consideration that you take into account when localizing for different platform or devices, for example, desktop between mobile, or is it the same?
So for iOS and Android, I would say that 98% we're using the same keys and the same copy. There's only a small variation in terms of the platforms that they can integrate with. So I think for one of the two options, we can integrate with more music platforms than the other one. So this is a very small variation in terms of, how we manage the content. Obviously for web, the good thing is we have more space. So we are not so concerned about, character restrictions. But other than that, we more or less follow the same approach. I think where we're obviously changing our approach is with our B2B platform, because essentially we have a different audience and a different relationship with that audience, even from the design and the UX copy, different approach. And of course, we apply the same in localization.
And when you have like a new feature or component that needs to be localized, how do you prioritize like which one across different countries? Let's say which one goes first, or which one maybe is going to be posted and done in a second, say next quarter, across different markets, especially if you have limited resources, which is most of the time the case. How do you manage that? Or if you have any suggestion, tips?
So this is something that I wasn't aware of before I joined DICE, because sometimes you deliver your work and you don't know where it's going next. So I think, and I will add another thing here, there were two things that really sort of surprised me when I joined. One is obviously how when you're expanding and you want to go into a new market, how localization is one of the main considerations in terms of cost or time. But very often there might be other complications that you might not even be able to preempt that might make the process much longer, much costlier. So obviously there's localization, there is legal regulations, but what I realized that can have a real impact is the payment options. And obviously when you have an online product, unless you can take payment, then the product is not there. So that was something that I did not really anticipate what an impact it can have, just to add an additional payment option to a product, how back it can push the whole process, but also the cost, all these hours that the teams have to put in. So the other thing that I wasn't aware of is that in order to release an app on the App Store and the Google Play Store, to have it available there in different languages and to maintain it every week, this app is kind of going under review every week, whether there's an update or not, because very often the regulations and the guidelines and the expectations are changing. Usually they become stricter. So they will always review the product to make sure that it's compatible with all of this. Means that if you have an app that is available in 5 languages, it needs to be up to date in all 5 languages in order to be available the week after. This means that whenever there is a new release coming up, I need to have my part of the work ready as soon as possible after the English part. The English app is ready. Otherwise, this delays the release. So this is something that can really impact the timelines. And yeah, this means that unless you create a separate app, particular for one market, this is something that means that you cannot really pick and choose between the markets and prioritize. You either make the whole feature release in one go, or you hold back and you go the next week.
And I guess like with this kind of issues and regular release, like having some kind of clear process, scalable process, and like continuous localization, it's probably something, I don't know if it was already set up or if you set up or something like that for DICE.
So the ideal case scenario is that for anything that needs to be released in that particular week, we get the briefing by, I would say, maybe Tuesday morning. And then I'm assuming it's not a big feature. Otherwise, it would be something that we would have broken down and worked for a few weeks. If it's a small update, then it is something that within 24 hours, my team can wrap up. Then it goes back to the developers, it goes through QA, and then it's ready by Friday for that submission. What we have done in the past, where either we need more time to complete our work, or some of our linguists are away. In these cases, we sort of go for a compromise. So we might put there some placeholder copy, so not final copy, just so that the feature can go out and cannot be kept back. And then whenever we wrap things up again, whenever our linguists are back, we review the copy. And if there are any updates, they go out with next week's updated app. So we're not that far behind. And obviously anything that is kind of low stakes. So if it was a very important release, we would never go for that. But yeah, because of also all the work in the TM that we have, we usually we can have a copy that is just okay, it will do, but it might not be the best work that we can do. So we go with that.
And actually, when you mention like a bigger release, how does it work? Like, how do you have visibility on that? Or like when a bigger release is coming up, and what you mentioned, like breaking it down like smaller pieces.
Being part of the product team, it means that I can always see what is in progress and what is coming our way. Whenever there's something bigger, the product managers, we break this down into smaller timelines, and we'll probably, tag us into the localization step. And we have this great visibility. Like for this feature, we're gonna work on version 1, first week of January, version 2, last week of January, etc., etc. Other times when PMs know that development might take a long time and there is a lot of new content, what we do, we might do like an initial localization. So once the design and the UX copy is more or less locked, they will just give us the whole file, and then we will just pull everything into our translation management system and do an initial translation that gives us time to think about terminology, look up terms, figure out how things work, and ask questions. This also gives us time. If we spot something that definitely doesn't work, there's still time to work. And this means that by the time we finish this, taking our time to figure out things and everything has been set up, when we get the actual keys, we usually match the translation over, and there might be like a 5-10% new or updated work. So this means that even for big releases, if we've done all this work in advance, we can just do a quick check, review, and release it. And of course, if there is a lot of time, an ideal case scenario, when we work with the design files and we import all the content into our TMS, once we're done, we can push it back and we can see exactly how the other languages will look into the design. So time permitting, this would be the best way to make sure that we can see that new feature from beginning to end and make sure that, the copy works and look at it from kind of like a top line view.
Yeah, because it allows you to, first of all, to buy some time, because while it's being worked on by developers, you're already like translating. As you said, most of the copy, there might be changes, which makes sense, but it will be like minimal work compared to having to do everything at the very end, maybe with the release date, pressuring you on. and it gives time, to follow up if there's anything unclear or it might not work. And absolutely. Yeah.
Especially for new features where we have to consider the name of the feature, and also considering how easy it is to name something in English, but not so easy to come up with a name in the other languages, then this is where we take our time to consider different options and also check with the local teams, because essentially everyone will get this in their hands in a few weeks. We want to make sure that the people who are going to be using the feature, whether it's on the B2C side or the B2B side, they will be happy with this and it makes sense for them since they are our end users, and they will be working with our partners who are also end users. So we always do this work in advance to also take in any other considerations that they might have regarding a particular feature, so that we don't have to make all the assumptions and then towards the end realize that we might have been wrong.
Yeah, it makes absolute sense. Actually, I wanted to ask you as well, like with the user feedback as well, if you get feedback from like, say, actual end user, how does it work? If you receive it, and how do you integrate that into the localization?
So we have a few ways available to give people options to give us feedback. The same way that anybody across the company can brief us with a translation request, they can also brief us with a localization improvement. So anything that they see across our product that might be related to language, even if it's something in English that they feel it doesn't really work, they send it to us, and then I triage these requests. It might be that it doesn't have to do anything with language. It might be that we need to tweak something in the code. But I'm sort of receiving all of these, and then if it's on my side, I take care of this with my team. If not, I involve the other teams in. So this is the best way because all of the work is tracked. Usually, sometimes this might also result into a new translation request or some development work. So then all the tickets are linked and you can see exactly the progress and I can go back to the original requester and update them. The other thing that we do, we have copy channels for every market that we support. We use this in both directions. So whenever the team have questions about any terms that are coming up, or they're reviewing existing content and might want to suggest a better way to handle something, they will post questions there. Really, really important to give context. I think sometimes as localization managers and translators, we forget that we kind of see everything and we have this big overview, but then people within a company that might work in one particular function and they might not have this full visibility. Or you might think, oh, I'm just talking about, this help center article. If you don't give the full context and you give people just a couple of lines, then they might not be able to help you to give you a better informed opinion. So context is everything there. We also use it the other way. If anybody spots anything that is not quite right, they let us know. If it's something worth looking into, we start a localization improvement ticket, and then everything is logged and it ends up in different people's queues. And of course, anything that we know that it will be sort of high visibility material or content, we tend to include a round of local approval in our process. Obviously, this is something that at the moment is very difficult to manage because my team consists of just one person. I have introduced the process and I've put together a guide of how to provide useful feedback, what are the different options that you can consider, and depending on the category of feedback we receive, what are the follow-up actions, so that whoever spends their time to provide feedback, because that's also very important. If somebody spends time, take time off their other responsibilities to provide feedback, I want them to know how this feedback will be handled and how it will be actioned and saved for future reference, so that they don't have to provide the same feedback again and again, because this is it's very tiring. And then it's also very off-putting when you realize that you spend time to provide feedback on something, but people have not considered it, then you don't want to spend your time anymore. So we will respond to feedback, even just to say out of, 10 instances of feedback that you provided, we declined 2 for this reason, we implemented 4 for this reason, and the other 4, they're preferential, so we can implement them, maybe not. It's just about, let's consider the whole style of the document and see if they make an actual difference or if it's just a clash of 2 styles.
Yeah, makes absolute sense. Yeah. And before we wrap up, I just want to ask you if there's anything else that we didn't discuss, then you think will be really important. Imagine you will want to give any recommendation or suggestion you might give to a product manager or somebody starting with product localization or developers, something that you think might be important and we didn't touch upon.
I think it is important to consider the different best practices or requirements that your localization team might have. Usually localization teams can make do with very little, and they usually, they can join the dots and get where they want to be. But I think when they request something, it means that it's really, really important for them. Very simple things, but that make a really big difference when you provide them with a brief, especially if it's a new feature. Just consider them like one person of your team. How do you brief them? Do you need to tell them what is the problem we're trying to resolve here, our approach, the different solutions? You probably have this document ready somewhere. So by sharing it with them, you empowering them to make the best decisions for the other markets. If you think about how many people are involved to finalize a new feature in its English version, probably I would say 20. And then you have this one person responsible to make sure that we present this in the best possible way, or maybe two, including me in the other market. Then you would like them to have everything they could possibly have to make all of these decisions by themselves. And then, of course, any visual reference for me is absolute key. So not just for ensuring that what we're working on right now is right, but usually, especially for small updates, it's always the case that we're just updating one sentence in a sequence of sentences. And if we translate blindly, we might end up repeating exactly what we have written just above. So if we have the full screen of the app, then we can look up those keys and see exactly what comes before, what comes afterwards, and then our work will be adjusted to that. So great detailed briefs and visual reference, and and also help with any queries. That also really, really helps us a lot. When we ask questions, usually what I do, and that's why I always put myself in the middle of the process, there are always questions that I can probably answer because I'm so involved in the product design process. So whenever actually a question goes back out to the team, it means that we have kind of held back a lot more. So when a question does reach them, means that I don't know the answer already. I've searched our documentation, I've searched previous requests, I've searched all the design files. So I've spent at least 15, 20 minutes and I cannot find the answer. And that's why I'm asking them. So basically, if there is a question, it means that it's very, very important.
Yeah, I would say, like, to any product manager or anybody that is not in the localization team, if you do get if you don't get question, it doesn't mean there were no questions. It's just we solve them internally. Usually, There's always questions. Anyway, it's great that you provide a lot of reference material. It's really good when you're talking about product, understand how it works, what you're supposed to do, like what the screen is about. Because it really, like, even if it's a few words, every word matters. And definitely in English, you thought about it very well. So it's good to understand, like, what's the reasoning behind it. Because sometimes you cannot directly translate. You need to, like, change it in a different language to make it achieve the same, let's say, outcome that you want, let's say, to click the button or to get, they know when they click there, where they're going to go. And but absolutely. The questions, I usually get suspicious. Like, if there's no question for the language team, there's something wrong.
I think whenever I outsource work to other language providers, if I get no questions, I am worried.
Yeah, it gets squiddish. If the translators don't ask questions, it's weird, something off.
Yeah, especially if you offer that option, because sometimes clients are busy, or actually there might be just another middle person in a long, succession of people that this request has trickled down. But when you say, if you have any questions, please ask me. I'm happy to get back to you before you finish translating, and you get none, then you're like, I don't know.
Yeah, especially in bigger projects, like you get no questions, like that's off.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you so much for joining us today at the Multilingual Content Podcast. I think it was a really good conversation. We could go on for hours, but our time is limited.
Great questions as well.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us today. The Multilingual Content Podcast is powered by Undertow. We help companies translate their content into results. Get in touch if you want to know more. And if you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any new episode. See you next time.